There is one sentence in the Bible that helped enslave more than 12 million human beings. 12 million men, women, children. And here is the part that should stop you cold. That sentence does not say what you were told it says. It never did, not once in the entire book. I want you to do something right now before I say another word. If you have a Bible in your house, on a shelf, in a drawer, in your phone, go get it. Open it to the very first book, Genesis, chapter 9, verse 25. Read it out loud. Go ahead, I will wait. Because you have just read 4 words that changed the shape of the modern world. Cursed be Canaan. Canaan, not Ham. Now read verse 26 and verse 27. Ham is not cursed. He is not cursed in this chapter, he is not cursed in this book, and he is not cursed anywhere in the 66 books that follow. More than 31,000 verses, and not one of them curses Ham. So how did a curse that does not exist end up in the mouth of nearly every preacher, every planter, and every politician in the American South? How did it end up in school books? How did it end up inside the heads of people who are still carrying it today, 200 years, without ever having read the verse? It happened because of a book, a real book, and you can find scanned copies of it online tonight. It was printed in 1843, and it was written by a harness maker from upstate New York. His name was Josiah Priest, and by the time I am finished, you are going to understand exactly how one obscure man, sitting at a wooden desk in Albany, packaged a lie so effectively that it outlived him by 180 years. Stay with me, because the verse is only the beginning. Picture a small workshop in Cambridge, New York in the early 1800s. Leather, awls, thread, the smell of oil and hide. This is where Josiah Priest worked. He was born in 1788, and he was a saddler and harness maker by trade. He had no seminary degree, no university training, and he had never studied ancient languages. By every measure, he was an ordinary tradesman. But Josiah Priest had one talent, and it was a dangerous one. He knew how to write things that people desperately wanted to believe. Long before he ever wrote about slavery, Priest published a book called American Antiquities. It came out in 1833, and it was a genuine bestseller, tens of thousands of copies. What was it about? It argued that the enormous earthen mounds across the Ohio and Mississippi valleys, the ones we now know were built by ancestors of Native American nations, could not possibly have been built by Native Americans. He suggested they were built by wandering Egyptians, or Greeks, or Hindus, or Romans, anyone but the people whose land it actually was. Sit with that for a second, because Priest's very first hit book was built on the same machine he would later use on Africa. Take a people, erase what they built, hand the credit to someone else, then sell the story back to the public. He had been practicing. And tell me in the comments, had you ever heard the name Josiah Priest before today? Be honest, most Americans have not, and that is exactly the problem. In 1843, Priest published a new book. The original title was long and clinical, Slavery as it Relates to the Negro or African Race, printed in Albany, New York. Years later, republished out of Louisville, Kentucky, it was given a shorter, bolder, far more marketable name, Bible Defense of Slavery. Same argument, cleaner packaging. And here is what that book set out to do. It did not simply argue that slavery was economically necessary, because plenty of men were already arguing that. Priest went further. He argued that slavery was divinely designed, that it was written into creation itself, that an entire branch of humanity had been marked at the dawn of history for permanent service. He built his whole case on Genesis chapter 9, and the way he built it is the entire story. He took a curse spoken about one specific person, Canaan, and quietly slid it up one generation onto Canaan's father, Ham. Then he took Ham, a single man in an ancient text, and turned him into an entire race. Then he took that invented race and mapped it onto the continent of Africa. 3 moves. Person becomes father, father becomes race, race becomes continent. Not one of those 3 moves is in the text, not one. And once you see the trick, you cannot unsee it. Comment the word Canaan below if you just checked your own Bible and saw it for yourself. I want to know how many of you actually did it. Now, why does the year matter so much? Because 1843 was not a quiet year. It was a year when the ground was shaking. Abolitionist newspapers were spreading through the North. Frederick Douglass was on the lecture circuit, and the Liberty Party was running candidates on an anti-slavery platform. And in June of that exact year, a formerly enslaved woman named Isabella Baumfree chose a new name for herself and walked out onto the road to preach. She called herself Sojourner Truth. Think about that. The same year, Josiah Priest published a book arguing that Black Americans were born to serve. Sojourner Truth was walking American roads, telling the country the exact opposite. 2 versions of history being written in the same 12 months, and only one of them got a printing press and a distribution network. Meanwhile, American churches were tearing themselves apart. In 1844, the Methodist Episcopal Church split in 2 over whether a bishop could own human beings. In 1845, Southern Baptists broke away and formed their own convention. The largest religious bodies in the country were fracturing straight down the middle. And in that gap, in that raw, open, bleeding gap, a defense was needed. Not just a legal defense, and not just an economic one, a moral one. Something a man could say out loud in church on Sunday and still sleep on Sunday night. Priest's book arrived precisely on time. That is not a coincidence. That is a market. There was a demand for a clean conscience, and Priest supplied it. All right, now we go to the verse itself, slowly, line by line, because this is where the whole thing collapses. Genesis chapter 9, after the flood. Noah plants a vineyard, he drinks the wine, and he becomes drunk and lies uncovered inside his tent. His son Ham sees him and tells his 2 brothers, Shem and Japheth. Shem and Japheth take a garment, walk in backward so they do not see their father, and cover him. Then Noah wakes up, and here is verse 25 word for word. Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be unto his brethren. Stop, read that name again. Canaan was not the one who walked into the tent. Ham was. Ham was Ham's son. He was not present, and he is not described as doing anything at all. And yet, the curse lands on him. Biblical scholars have argued for centuries about why. Some think it points forward to later conflicts between Israel and the Canaanite city-states. Some think the text was preserved imperfectly. Some think it reflects an ancient view of family responsibility. But you do not need to settle that debate to see the point, because whatever the reason, the name in the verse is fixed. It says Canaan. It does not say Ham. Now here is the second thing, and it is even bigger. Read verse 25 one more time and ask yourself a very simple question. Who is speaking? It is not God. God does not speak in verse 25. God does not speak in verse 26. God does not speak in verse 27. The speaker is Noah, a man waking up, angry, hungover. There is no divine decree here, no thunder, no voice from heaven. There is a father, furious, saying something bitter about his grandson. So for 400 years, an entire hemisphere organized its economy around a sentence that a drunk man said inside a tent about a child who was not even in the room, and they told you God said it. Say that out loud to somebody today and watch their face change. Now, let us take the argument seriously for one moment. Let us say, for the sake of argument, that someone wanted to insist the curse falls on a whole people. Fine. Then we have to ask a real question. Who were the Canaanites? And here is where history stops being an argument and starts being evidence you can hold in your hands. We know exactly who the Canaanites were. They lived in the Levant, the eastern Mediterranean coast, modern Lebanon, Israel and Palestine, western Syria, western Jordan. We have their cities excavated, mapped, photographed. Hazor, Megiddo, Lachish, Ugar on the Syrian coast. We have their writing, too. The Amarna letters from the 14th century before the Common Era are clay tablets sent by Canaanite city rulers to the Egyptian court. We can read them. We have their names, their complaints, their requests for troops. We have the Merneptah stele, an Egyptian victory monument from around 1200 before the Common Era, which names Canaan directly. These were olive growers, sailors, purple dye makers, and traders whose alphabet is an ancestor of the very letters on your screen right now. And in recent years, we have gone one step further. Researchers have recovered and sequenced ancient DNA from Canaanite burials, including remains from Sidon in modern Lebanon, dating back roughly 3,700 years, and from sites across the southern Levant. The results were published in peer-reviewed scientific journals, and what they found was continuity. Canaanite ancestry did not vanish, it flowed forward into the populations of the modern Levant. The Canaanites were a Middle Eastern people. They were not West African. They never were West African. The entire curse of Ham doctrine required Canaan to be Africa. Archaeology says no. Genetics says no. The Bible's own geography says no. The doctrine does not just fail on morality, it fails on the map. And that brings us to Genesis chapter 10, exactly one chapter later. This chapter usually gets skipped because it reads like a phone book, just names and more names, but it is one of the most important chapters in this entire story, and I need you to hear why. Genesis 10 lists the sons of Ham, Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. Now watch what happens when you place those names on a real map, using what historians and archaeologists actually know. Cush is Nubia, the Nile Valley south of Egypt, modern Sudan. Mizraim is Egypt, and it is still the Arabic name for Egypt today. Put is generally associated with Libya and the North African coast, and Canaan, as we just established, is the Levant. So the sons of Ham are Nubia, Egypt, Libya, and the Middle East. Look at what that list is not. It is not a race. It is a region. It is the ancient Nile world and its neighbors, the great river civilizations and the coastal states around them. And now ask the question the doctrine never wanted you to ask. Does the text describe these peoples as servants? Egypt is described as an empire, a superpower, the nation Israel repeatedly runs to for grain, for refuge, for military alliance. Cush is described as a kingdom of real consequence. Nothing on that list reads like a footnote, and nothing on it reads like a curse. A doctrine claiming the descendants of Ham were destined to serve had to look directly at Egypt and Nubia, two of the most powerful civilizations of the ancient world, and pretend it did not see them, which is a strange kind of blindness for a book that claimed to be reading carefully. Now, I have to tell you something that complicates the story. And I am telling you because it makes the story worse, not better. Josiah Priest did not invent this lie. I know that is not what you expected, but it is the truth, and the truth is sharper. The confusion between Ham and Canaan is very old. Versions of it appear in commentaries and traditions across several ancient religious communities, centuries before America existed, in different cultures and for different reasons. Then it began to travel with the ships. In the mid-1400s, a Portuguese chronicler writing about the earliest Atlantic slaving voyages reached for the Noah story to explain what he was watching. And in 1578, an English writer named George Best did something even more consequential. He explicitly tied the story of Noah to skin color, not to nations, not to lands, but to the body itself. That was the hinge, because once you attach a curse to a body, it becomes permanent. It cannot be escaped by converting, or moving, or building, or achieving. It becomes inheritance. From there, the argument moved into English pamphlets, into colonial sermons, into Caribbean plantation manuals, and finally onto American soil. So Josiah Priest did not create the lie. He did something more effective. He mass-produced it. He took a scattered, inconsistent folk argument and turned it into a hardback with chapters and a table of contents. He gave it structure, he gave it an American accent, and he gave it a price, a printer, and a distribution route. He made it purchasable. An idea whispered for centuries is a rumor. An idea printed and bound and sold in Albany and Louisville and Charleston is a doctrine. That is what 1843 actually was, not the birth of the lie, its industrialization. And I already know some of you are going to argue with me about this in the comments. Good. Argue. Bring sources. That is exactly what this conversation has been missing for 2 centuries. Let us talk about money, because doctrines this durable are never free. By 1860, the total market value assigned to enslaved people in the United States has been estimated by economic historians at around $3 billion. To understand that number, you have to understand what it was larger than. It was larger than the combined value of all American railroads. It was larger than the combined value of all American factories. Enslaved human beings were, on paper, the single largest capital asset in the country, and raw cotton produced by that labor made up more than half of everything America exported to the world. Now hold those two facts side by side. An economy that size cannot run on force alone. Force is expensive. Force needs guards, and guards need wages, and fear needs constant maintenance. What an economy that size really needs is agreement. It needs the overseer to believe it, the shopkeeper to believe it, the school teacher and the shipping clerk and the woman in the 4th pew to believe it. It needs ordinary people to feel comfortable. That is what Priest's book delivered, not chains, comfort. The most valuable product in the American slave economy was not cotton, it was a clear conscience, and Josiah Priest was selling it, 1 volume at a time. Now let me show you the part that was deliberately kept quiet. Because if a cursed doctrine is going to hold, the people preaching it must control which pages you are allowed to read. So let us open the pages they skipped. Start with Numbers chapter 12. Moses, the central human figure of the Hebrew Bible, marries a Cushite woman, a woman from the Nile kingdom south of Egypt. His sister Miriam and his brother Aaron criticize him for it. And the text does not side with the critics. Miriam is the one who is rebuked. Miriam is the one who is struck. The very first recorded objection to Moses marrying a Cushite woman is answered from above, and the answer is not on the side of the objectors. Now go to 2 Kings chapter 19 and Isaiah chapter 37. There is a king named Tirhakah, king of Cush. This is not a legend, this is a documented pharaoh. His name in Egyptian records is Taharka, and he ruled Egypt in the 7th century before the Common Era as part of the 25th dynasty, the Nubian dynasty, the Cushite pharaohs who came up the Nile from what is now Sudan and ruled the Egyptian empire. We have his monuments at Karnak, we have his temple at Kawa, we have the pyramid field at Nuri, where the Cushite kings were buried, and there are more pyramids standing in Sudan today than in Egypt. A Cushite pharaoh standing right there in the pages of the Bible, commanding armies against Assyria. Now Jeremiah chapter 38. The prophet Jeremiah has been thrown into a cistern to die in the mud. Who saves him? A man named Ebed-Melech, and the text identifies him as a Cushite. He goes to the king, he argues Jeremiah's case, and then he gathers old rags and worn-out cloth and lowers them down so the ropes will not cut into the prophet's arms as they pull him out. He does not just save a life, he does it with tenderness. That detail about the rags is in the text because somebody thought it mattered. And later, in chapter 39, Ebed-Melech is promised protection by name. Now Acts chapter 8. An official of the Kandake, which is a real Meroitic royal title from the Cushite kingdom and is attested in archaeology, is traveling home reading the scroll of Isaiah, and he becomes one of the first people in the New Testament narrative to be baptized. And Acts chapter 13 lists the leaders of the church at Antioch, among them Simeon, called Niger. So let us count. A Cushite wife defended from heaven, a Cushite pharaoh named as a king, a Cushite who rescues a prophet, a Cushite official baptized, an African presence in the earliest church leadership. None of these people are described as cursed. None of them are described as servants by birth. They are wives, kings, rescuers, officials, and leaders. The doctrine did not misread one verse. It had to hide an entire library. So why did it last so long after the Civil War ended? Because doctrines do not die when laws change. They retreat into habit. The curse argument outlived slavery and was carried straight into the segregation era. It showed up in sermons defending separation into the 1950s and 60s, and it was used to justify exclusion from congregations and institutions well into living memory. Some of the people watching this video right now had grandparents who heard it preached from a pulpit as fact. And then, slowly, it broke. Not because someone found a new manuscript, but because people finally read the old one carefully. Scholars traced the doctrine backward and showed it was a chain of misreadings, not a chain of revelation. And institutions began to say so out loud. In 1995, the Southern Baptist Convention, founded in 1845 in the very split I described earlier, formally adopted a resolution repudiating its historic defense of slavery and racism and apologized. In 2013, The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints published an essay explicitly disavowing the theories, including curse-based explanations, that had been used to justify its former restrictions. Mainstream biblical scholarship today treats the racial curse of Ham not as a debated interpretation, but as a documented historical misuse of the text. That is not a fringe position. That is the consensus. The lie has been dismantled in the academy for decades. The problem is that nobody sent the memo to the culture, which is exactly why we are here. So let me end where I started, but with everything you now know. Genesis 9 verse 25 is a real verse. It names Canaan and it does not name Ham. It is spoken by a man, not by God. It concerns a Middle Eastern people whose cities we have excavated and whose descendants still live in the Levant today. And it has nothing to do with the ancestry of the people who were loaded onto ships and carried across the Atlantic. Now, some of you carry a faith tradition that reads your history through the story of ancient Israel. That tradition has its own long American history, going back to congregations founded in the 1890s and early 1900s, and it deserves to be discussed seriously and respectfully, rather than mocked. But hear me carefully, because this is the heart of it. You do not need to win an argument about ancestry to be free of this, because the curse was never there. There is nothing to be released from. There is nothing to be lifted. There is only a page that was misquoted by a man who was not a scholar in a year when America needed an excuse. And underneath that page, the record that was always sitting there. Kingdoms on the Nile that ruled Egypt itself. Pyramids still standing in Sudan. A pharaoh whose name is written in the Bible. A Cushite who pulled a prophet out of the mud with rags so the ropes would not cut him. That is the inheritance, not a curse, a record. So here is what I am asking. If this changed something for you, send it to one person, just one, someone who grew up hearing that a curse explained their history, and let them open Genesis 9 themselves and read the name that is actually printed there. And tell me in the comments, what year did you first hear about the curse of Ham, and who told you? I read every single one, because for 180 years, one man's book got to do all the talking. Starting today, that changes.